It's here. The 2024 UFL season kicked off this past weekend, and I watched every game. I'll give you a quick recap of everything that I saw, along with a follow-up of all my thoughts on this league as it kicks off. The anticipated showdown between the former XFL champions Bob Stoops' Renegades and USFL champions Skip Holtz's Stallions took place at Choctaw Stadium in front of 14,000 fans. Former third-round pick Matt Corral struggled early with Arlington's sticky man coverage, and after a brief benching for Adrian Martinez, returned locked in. The Renegade defense continued to generate strong pressure on the pocket, but an inability to defend the middle of the field and the quarterback run allowed Birmingham to score. Spring football poster boy Luis Perez, building off of his success with Arlington last year, was clicking early and kept the game tight for the Renegades against the stout Birmingham defense, but slowly fell apart late and missed throws at key moments. Saturday night concluded with head coach Anthony Becht's St. Louis Battlehawks traveling to play Mike Nolan's Michigan Panthers at Ford Field in front of a dismal crowd of only 9,500. Quarterback A.J. McCarron deployed a balanced, methodical, and effective offense, distributing the ball between running back Wayne Gallman, wide receiver Marcel Aitman, wide receiver Darius Shepard, and tight end Hakeem Butler. However, the Panthers' defense clamped down in the red zone with the help of outside linebacker Breland Speaks, linebacker Frank Ginda, and safety Kai Nakua. Michigan quarterback E.J. Perry struggled early in the game with a bad interception and then a really unlucky interception in the red zone, resulting in a 3-0 Battlehawks lead at halftime. However, the second half saw the game break open offensively. E.J. Perry was able to find some rhythm with 2 big passes and a run into the end zone, then drove down the field again with a strong rushing attack of USFL leading rusher Wes Hills behind center Noah Brown. But A.J. McCarron and Marcel Aitman would help the Battlehawks come roaring back to take the lead with only about a minute left in the game. With so little time left, Michigan would need to rely on the leg of Jake Bates, a kickoff specialist who hadn't kicked a field goal since high school, for a 64-yard attempt to win the game, which he hit into the net while getting iced. So he did it again. 64 yards to win the game with extra leg to spare. The Wade Phillips-led San Antonio Brahmas hosted the 2023 9-1 XFL runner-up DC Defenders in front of 13,000 fans at the Alamo Dome, where the Defenders last played and lost in the 2023 XFL Championship game. Brahma's offensive coordinator A.J. Smith shocked the Greg Williams DC defense. Yeah, that Greg Williams. With an up-tempo, fast-paced offense that scored quickly. DC was poised to make a late-game comeback when Brahma's cornerback Darius Phillips picked off DC quarterback Jordan Taiamu in the red zone and returned it to the DC 5-yard line in the middle of the fourth quarter to essentially ice the game. The inaugural week of UFL football concluded with what appears to be the league's best offense battling the league's toughest defense. Case Kukas and the Memphis Showboats offense was able to methodically work down the field early against the Houston Roughnecks' strong defense, and after a first play fumble return for a touchdown, Houston spent most of the game playing from behind. With a gorgeous touchdown catch to end the half, it looked like the Roughnecks were doomed at home. However, 2 second-half turnovers by former first-round pick Reuben Foster, first with an interception and then with a fumble recovery in the Memphis red zone, put the Roughnecks in a position to make a strong comeback. But when the Roughnecks were poised to start their final drive, they muffed the punt and gave away the end of the game to spoil the East Texas Easter. Here's the first thing that I'm excited about with this league. It's happening. It kicked off on time in all 8 markets exactly as they wanted to. Now, while they decided to use Easter weekend as an opening weekend, which also hosted MLB opening weekend and the tail end of March Madness tournament, that may not have been the most optimal weekend. Daryl Johnston has been in a couple of interviews where he's mentioned that they couldn't start too much earlier than that because of a lot of the logistics involved in merging the leagues, starting as late as September. And I don't think that they wanted to drift too far into the summer as well. So I think the opening kickoff weekend is a date that's going to kind of fluctuate as they test around with different things. I was still impressed that they managed the attendance that they did. 14,000 fans in 2 of the markets is good draw. 9,000 fans is a dip, but one of the things I noticed is that the home game in Michigan at Detroit, that was one of the last stadiums to start selling single game tickets. So an odd choice for an opening weekend home game, especially when their opponent, the St. Louis Battlehawks, was a team that I believe had a locked-in arena and was the place that averaged the most fans by far last year. But they also managed to average over 1 million viewers per game on TV. So those are strong numbers. I was impressed with that, and I was impressed with watching it. The other thing I'm excited about, the talent. Cutting down to 8 teams may not have been my favorite idea, but it was probably the smartest idea to trim down and consolidate the talent as much as possible. And you know, it was easy to see early when there were some surprise cuts right at the in the lead up to week 1. Some of the more dominant players in the respective spring leagues last year didn't make a roster or couldn't make their team's roster that drafted them. So it's pretty clear that cutting down to this has really consolidated the talent and allowed for the strongest possible product. I think it's a great idea that St. Louis is hosting the championship game this year. That market brought the strongest attendance last year and plenty of fervor, and I think that an empty stadium for a championship game is just a bad look. I do think it's weird that they didn't host opening weekend as well and instead went to Michigan, but I've already covered that. I also think that it's exciting that the NFL has adopted the XFL version of the kickoff. Now, while that's not the version of the kickoff that's being used here, I think it simply illustrates one of the many arms of honing the NFL into the best possible football product that I outlined in my earlier video a couple of months back. A couple of things I'm not really that excited about. There's still some bad branding with this league. For starters, all the press releases are printed on the most sterile looking letterhead ever. This looks like a Google Doc to me, and it just looks unprofessional from my perspective. I also just don't like the way that the Roughnecks and Gamblers thing went down. So for those who don't know, the Houston Roughnecks is a former XFL franchise. The Houston Gamblers is a former USFL franchise dating back to the 80s. And when the leagues merged, they decided to choose the Houston market with a collaboration of both leagues, using the Houston Roughnecks branding and adopting the Houston Gamblers staff and players. This to me feels like cooperation for the sake of cooperation, which is, you know, not necessarily the worst thing, but we're not choosing the best products here. I think the Houston Roughnecks, while, you know, I made a whole portion of my video about branding and embracing the culture of the city, and I think that the Roughnecks moniker does that. I think that this uniform is a travesty. I don't know what we're trying to do here. We're trying to be half of the Texas state flag, even though Houston's not the capital at all, and we're not using the colors or anything other than this Houston Oilers ripoff logo as any kind of callback to the name at all. I think actually if they had kept the Houston Gamblers color, you're looking more like an oil man. I just think that everything about the Houston Roughnecks thing here is lazy. We've used somebody else's logo, used a synonym for the team name, and just took the state flag and decided that that was the uniform. I also think that the Brahmas is another really weird thing here. The Brahmas is another great example of embracing a culture. It doesn't matter that I don't know that a Brahma is some kind of bull. I didn't know that a terrapin was some kind of turtle, but Maryland taught me that when I was a little kid. Here's my bigger thing. This logo sucks. I don't really know what this is supposed to be. I know what it looks like, though. Speaking of, the Arlington Renegades uniform and logo and branding, it all looks like a mess. It looks like they've got something here. Like, oh, we got this great idea. And then just stopped and didn't bother to refine it into anything that makes any sense. You've got, you know, kind of a cool logo. It's a little generic clip arty. And then we decided not to use that. We're just going to use this whack R. You've got some really cool colors here. And then because this logo that we don't use for the logo has red eyes, we've got random red pinstripes on the numbers. There's a ton of blue. And yeah, it just feels like we've got a right color scheme, we've got a cool name, we've got something going here, and we didn't make a good uniform. You know what I mean? Everything feels a little bit off to me. But nevertheless, Choctaw, that is a cool looking stadium. I will say that. If you want a good benchmark for what makes excellent uniforms, look no further than the St. Louis Battlehawks and Michigan Panthers. I think that game was a showcase in perfect looking uniforms. Both of these look beautiful. These are some of the coolest uniforms I've seen. One thing I didn't really like about Michigan, though, I don't really like that the end zones used mostly the accent color blue, and almost entirely used the accent color blue, especially when you're playing St. Louis. I don't know whose design choice that was, or maybe it's easier to paint blue on top of what is normally blue as opposed to going with this deep crimson. But nevertheless, I thought it was a really strange and stupid decision. Now, here's something that I'm really not excited about. On his own podcast, Greg Williams claimed that the UFL could expand up to 12 teams in 2025 and up to 16 teams in 2026. I think that while this sounds exciting to have more teams, this seems aggressive and unsustainable, and reckless for that matter. They should aim lower. I will admit that watching 10 weeks of the same 8 teams playing each other is bound to get dry and dull. This seems like unnecessary expense. Now remember, all of these teams are wholly owned by the league, so every new staff means taking on the expenses of paying that new staff and a new arena and all the travel to that, and expanding by one team at a time will upset the balance of conferences, so you're kind of looking at 2 at a time. So really, I honestly think that 2 straight years, unless this league does incredibly well, I honestly think that 2 straight years of an 8-team league should if it's a success story, should generate enough revenue and enough interest to expand to 10 teams in 2026. And they should pick those markets very, very, very carefully. I've got some great ideas with Columbus, Ohio, and Albuquerque, New Mexico. That way you can kind of slowly creep back into the north and fill out the northern area of the map, while also opening a pathway through the west to kind of head into that direction as well, while everything is sort of concentrated into the South and Middle America. One last thing that I'm really excited about, which makes no sense to me at all, is that I lambasted very hard against the idea of an XFL and USFL conference. There's no rivalry here. These teams, the way that they've distributed the rosters was very fair, and you had a lot of cross-pollination between the leagues, and nevertheless, both leagues had plenty of players move on to the NFL. So what we're looking at here isn't really an XFL versus USFL game when we watch former XFL teams play against USFL teams. Nevertheless, this weird rivalry seems to generate plenty of interest from fans of the former spring leagues. I can't believe that I'm seeing it everywhere, because none of it makes any sense to me, but it's still happening. So until the league expands into new markets, I think that they should keep the conferences the way they are, and I really think that should be in the next 2 years. Once they've expanded, they should start looking to make it an East-West conference or a North-South conference. That's going to do it with one final thing. I have picked 2 teams before the kickoff of this league that I am choosing to root for. One from the XFL, one from the USFL. Now, my favorite team from the XFL is going to be the one that was most regionally close to me, and that is the DC Defenders. That's right, I'm a DC Defender, and I'm saying it after they've lost, so you know it's true. On the USFL side, I'm a New Jersey General born and bred. That being said, they haven't made the cut without a place to play, so I will move to the USFL team that took on the most New Jersey Generals, and that's the Memphis Showboats. So here's to the best offense in the league. See you next time.